My name is Amelia Vrabel, and I will be presenting on hybrid work and making hybrid work work. And I presented on this a little bit last year here at the CI Expo, and there has definitely been, a few things to revisit and then a few things to add to that since, as we all know, technology and culture and everything like that has changed, continues to evolve in this world that we live in. So. Before I get started, I do want to thank the IMCCA who sponsors this whole track for the CI Expo. And the IMCCA, if you're not familiar with them, they are a not-for-profit organization, and they focus on industry alliances, networking opportunities, and also educational opportunities for many of us. And they do have a booth here at the show. You can also find them on social at the IMCCA. So definitely go ahead and check them out. Really appreciate all their support for this and a number of the other sessions that we'll be holding here. Now I don't want to spend a lot of time on me, but just to kind of give you a background, I have been in the AV sort of UC world for about the last 20 years. We were just talking about this. Actually, I think my first show that I ever attended in this industry was CIDIA back in 2005. So I haven't been there every year. I was here last year, and of course, it's great to have it here in Denver because I actually live in Colorado, and it's very rare that I can actually drive to a show. Most of the time we have to get on a plane. Welcome. And so yeah, it's great to have a great show here in Colorado. And I've had some experiences both on the manufacturer side of the business and on the integrator side. So it's also great to see some different perspectives and learn a lot of things along the way. I currently work for CIX, and I work on our Alliances go-to-market team, working with some software manufacturers to develop some joint solutions and some joint go-to-market activities. And really, I just have a passion for work and making work better and more productive. And there's so much great stuff going on right now in this industry and in other industries, but we really have a unique opportunity to help our customers through these changing times, in what we do. So yeah, like being part of this. So since it's a small group, if there's questions, just ask them. We don't need to save them for the end, but just encourage you if you have anything to speak up or raise your hand or whatever you feel comfortable with. So I wanted to sort of start off, by acknowledging that there is a divide between employers and employees when it comes to looking at how we work, right? And I think a lot of this has been going on a long time, but really got exacerbated during the pandemic because everything really changed for a lot of people. March of 2020, which, in a way seems like yesterday, and in another way it seems like 20 years ago. But personally, I have been a remote worker for 10 years. So since I've actually lived in Colorado for 10 years, and I've always been a remote worker ever since I lived here. So when the pandemic happened for me, it didn't really change my world in terms of learning how to work remotely. I kind of joke that I had all these friends who were like, what is this Zoom thing we have to start using? I'm like, oh, I've been using that for years, right? And so it was different for a lot of other people, though, and also for me, the only thing that really changed was in my house, I was not the only one who was working remotely at that point. That was probably the biggest change for me, is it used to be okay, I had my place to myself, but then everybody went home and my partner was home, and I kind of laughed at it in a way because he had been working in an office for 30 years, right? And then he used to ask me to do things during the day, and oh, can you take care of this, or empty the dishwasher, or take out the laundry? And then he'd come home and be like, well, how come none of that's done? And I'm like, well, because I'm working, And he came home when everybody came home from the pandemic and realized, oh yeah, you don't get all the stuff done during the day around the house that you might think is so easy to get done, because you can actually spend some good focused time working. And that really opened a lot of people's eyes up to just a different way of working, and maybe how they were working before and how they might be working today, and just living in this different world of work that we all came to learn. And it changes your perspective, and it changes the lens in which you see things. And so that's something that, started to be, always has kind of been, really started to become more visible during the pandemic. And, really this divide has continued to grow because, there's a lot of polarizing viewpoints on how work should be done, right? And there's a lot of terms that you hear out there. One of the ones that we hear a lot is this quiet quitting idea, which isn't actually quitting at all. It's really this perspective of like, well, I'm just going to do what I do, and anything outside of that is not really part of what I need to do. And it makes you kind of wonder, like, do people not feel fulfilled in the work that they do? Like, why is it that they, don't want to give any more than, kind of the bare minimum in a lot of cases? I'm not saying that for everybody, but there's definitely just sort of been this polarizing viewpoint on work and where work fits in, and maybe even a little bit of, thinking about not just how your life fits into your work, but how your work fits into your life. And I think that's probably been the biggest sort of viewpoint shift that we've seen over the last, few years, especially as people started to figure out, well, hey, if I can work remotely, then I can make other parts of my life work a little bit better versus like when I had to go to an office every day and commute. And I've read a lot of interesting things lately about like one of the worst activities that people want to do in general in their life is commute. Like it's great when you have great podcasts or maybe you can talk on the phone, although my like insurance app doesn't like it when I talk on the phone, so I try not to do that. But really, people don't like to sit in traffic. I mean, really, that's not an activity that anybody really wants to do. So, we started to see a lot of sort of life priorities replacing work priorities. And certainly, obviously, earning an income is important, but people started to realize, hey, there's ways that, I can make work for me and fit into my life and work in the way that makes the most sense for me to be productive. And that really was visible. Welcome, just come on in, this is very informal. This really became visible, especially for people, a lot of women, especially mothers, caregivers, and then other people that were disabled, right? Maybe they were homebound and they couldn't go to an office. And now all of a sudden, these opportunities open up for them that weren't there before. So there were a lot of these, great discoveries that happened. Not to, put anything on the pandemic, because obviously nobody wants to go through that again, but we did learn a lot of things that we came out of it and we're like, well, wait a minute, now people can progress in a world that maybe they couldn't progress in the past. And, I don't have children, but I know a lot of, my friends do, and their ability to be productive and contribute has really, really changed, given that they can now, work from home and have some flexibility, where it's not just your 9 to 5 in the office or whatever, hours you might have been in the office before. So this is an interesting kind of graph I'll show here that I found on some sort of return to office research, right? And I think this shouldn't be really surprising to anyone to take a look at, office occupancy was pretty much full, right? And then March of 2020 happened, and then it was nobody. So we went from this, 100%-ish, office occupancy, down to pretty much nothing. And then as time went on, after the pandemic began and people started to return to the office, right? And so that's a trend that we saw in pretty much every major market out there. Yes, there's a little bit of differentiation when you, compare New York to California to Texas or what have you. But essentially, we saw this trend go up, until about January of 2023. Right? And then since January of 2023, it has roughly been flat. There has not really been a significant change in this return to office movement. And I think I said last year, like, I hope we're not still talking about the return. Okay, I really hope we're not still talking about return to work, because I don't know about all y'all, but like all that time we weren't in the office, I was still working. And so I hated, actually, that was like my pet peeve term, is return to work, because we were all working. Now, return to office, yes, but even that, is effectively over because it has stabilized. Now, does this mean it's going to stabilize and be like this forever? No, not necessarily, but there's really no indicators out there that tells me that we're going to go back to 2019. Because again, we've seen things through different lenses. We've had a different change of perspective in terms of where work fits into our lives. And so if anything, I would expect to see this continue to stabilize or even potentially move in a different direction, because what also is changing is the technologies to allow people to be more effective doing things from farther away are also increasing, right? So that would only tell me that the things that we might have to go somewhere to do, we may not have to go somewhere to do anymore. And that's kind of where you look back at like the start of the pandemic and the return to office. The people who really needed to return to their workplace, a lot of them did that at the beginning of the pandemic, like basically right at the beginning of the pandemic, right? You couldn't effectively be a restaurant server, for instance, working from home. You couldn't effectively, be a surgeon working from home. So those people returned many, many, many months ago. And then we're kind of trying to navigate through some of the rest of this as time goes on. And of course, that's going to be very different based on role, based on organization, based on culture, and that's a lot of the things, to talk about here. But ultimately, we've more or less like stabilized looking at the data on about 25%, of hybrid is going into an office. And again, this is very different on different people. There's probably people, and if you were to poll people in this organization at this conference, how often they might be in an office, it might be a couple days a week, right? Assuming they even live in the vicinity of an actual office that they could go to. But I would say what I tend to hear from most people that don't have what I call like mission critical sort of frontline jobs, it's a couple times a week, maybe more if they like it, maybe less if they don't, maybe if depending on what kind of work they do. Again, and that's where kind of you realize like there's definitely a lot of value to bringing people together to do collaborative work. But if you don't really do any collaborative work, if you're a programmer, let's say, and you're writing code all day long, that might not be a necessity for you to be in the office as much as somebody who's, working with customers or kind of designing things in a team or what have you. So that's definitely going to just continue to vary based on, your role and your responsibility. But there still is a bit of a gap in terms of what many employers feel like people should be in the office versus what the employees actually feel like they should be in the office. And I think for the most part, not everybody's aligned there because various different reasons, obviously, but that's definitely something that we continue to see is that there's not a good agreement. I hear a lot of, well, they want us to be doing this, but we're really doing this, or they're trying to get us to do this, but we're kind of doing this, and people making it work for what really makes sense for them. And then, this is an interesting time, and it, honestly, the last year was as well, but this is an interesting time to sort of be having these conversations and investigating all this because, there's still, unfortunately, a lot of instability in the job market out there. And I feel like we hear on a fairly regular basis large companies having mass layoffs. And so it's, that's happening. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, that is kind of like a game of musical chairs in a way, in a lot of cases. But it's also very hard for companies to, at the same time, locate the right talent, right? And being able to locate the right talent is incredibly hard already, especially when you're not just looking for the talent that you need today. You really need to be looking for the talent that you think you're going to need in 12 months because it takes time for people to get up to speed, but then you need to be thinking ahead for your business and what your business needs are going to be so that you're hiring people that are effectively prepared to address that. So a lot of reskilling going on, a lot of taking a look at what talent do we need and where are those people? And maybe if my headquarters are in Denver, I don't want to just look in Denver for these people because there's only so many people that live in Denver, right? And maybe those people could live somewhere else and be more valuable to my organization if I open the aperture a bit in that regard. So this is definitely, and I had some articles like this last year when I presented. These are newer articles. This is not something that's changing. Honestly, I could update this probably on a monthly basis and I'd find new articles talking about somebody thinks people need to go back to the office and somebody thinks they don't need to go back to the office. And you hear a lot of blaming, unfortunately, of, well, if we had had everybody back in the office, we would have been able to be more innovative in this area, or we would have been able to do this, or what have you. And that's a debate that obviously has multi-pieces of it, because physically having people sit together doesn't actually result in better work necessarily, especially when you're talking about companies that have had a global presence, say, and they've never had everybody in the same location. Well, how can you make that argument then, right? So this is, continuing to be a hot topic. Has it fizzled? Are people still complaining about it? But the data shows really that the amount of sort of return to office has effectively stabilized over the last year and a half to where we're at. But people are still fussing about it. People are still trying to figure out what works for them. And as the tools and technologies change, that also continues to change, and that also continues to evolve. And I think that's just an area that we're going to have to continue to, again, look at, organization by organization. And when somebody comes out and says, this is what's best, this is what's most productive, well, maybe for them or for that group or for what have you, but, not necessarily for everyone. So anyway, all of this really comes back to, where we are today. And I think we can effectively say the future of work is flexible, right? The future of work is not what it used to be. We're not going back to 2019. We're not going to say, okay, you have to be in the office or you have to be fully remote. It's a combination. It's that, both and, not, either or sort of viewpoint of the world. And we need to also, as professionals in AV, understand from the viewpoint of not just how we can work most effectively, but how can we help our customers work most effectively. And that's delivering equitable experiences both in the conference room and for the remote employee, because we can't ignore the fact that those parties both exist today. All right, so, we are seeing, again, you can find all kinds of reports on this stuff, but ultimately what we are seeing is that the firms that are adopting flexible work models are more successful. I will say, excuse me, I need a lot of water today. Part of the reason for that is that people like to have some flexibility in their lives, right? And one of the worst things that a company can have to deal with is continuing to hire people. It's very expensive to find new people, hire new people, train new people, onboard new people, and all that, right? So if you can minimize your need to continually hire new people, you're going to be more productive. Full stop, right? Because you're not spending a lot of time just training somebody so they can go leave. And when you allow people to have that flexibility, they are more likely going to stay at your organization. I mean, I love my job, but if they told me I had to go to Boulder every day or move to Southern California, I'd have to look for a new job. It would not fundamentally make sense to me. Not to mention, it wouldn't make sense to the company either, because that isn't necessary given the fact that I spend my whole day talking to people that aren't in either one of those places. But that's the kind of stuff that makes people, it's a factor now in deciding where you're going to spend a huge chunk of your time, is having some of that flexibility. So that's number one. And number two is, like I mentioned earlier, when you can allow for some flexibility in work, you open your talent pool up. And so you can hire the A players because you have the ability to hire from anywhere versus, staying within a geography that is very limited, and you may not be able to get the A players because maybe the A players are all happily working for somebody else, right? So you have that ability to deliver not just productivity, but value, right, in your work. And you have people that are delivering great work because they're happy to be there. They've got the flexibility. Work is now part of their life, and they feel invested in that company as something that works with them and not just something they have to go to because it's a grind, right? So, but because of that, we've had to take a look at, do these meeting spaces that we have for hybrid work, are we set up to do hybrid work, right? Fortunately, I think none of us in this conference are in the business of selling a lot of desks and chairs, because I unfortunately think that is probably not an area that would be particularly lucrative if you're going into building new office space, right? Because back in the day when you needed to have a desk and a chair for every single employee, but that's not the case anymore if people are not there all the time, right? We can all pretty much agree on that. But a lot of companies back 5 years ago, and just, back 2019, they had a lot of desks and chairs and a few conference rooms. Well, that doesn't really work if you're trying to get people back to have collaborative experiences. Because if their whole reason that they're back is to have collaborative experiences, you don't want to run out of conference space. You don't want to run out of rooms where they can actually, do that. So you really need to look at your environment, and that's a great opportunity for us in this industry to be able to help people reconfigure their office space, put the right technology in, and maybe that's actually less space than they had before, but it's potentially more productive space than they had before, because now they have the ability to make that space really more useful for them and for their organization. So, taking a look at some of this stuff is really, when you're talking with your customers and you're talking with folks about, what that office looks like or what their work really looks like. I don't even like using the word office, because work is both home and office, or flexible and office, and how do we make everything that we have work in the best possible way for this organization, given what they do, who they are, and what objectives they're really trying to get to. And really, when you look at it, it's making the workplace a people-centered destination. If I'm going to get in the car and I'm going to drive, 30 minutes to go somewhere, I want it to be worth my while, right? And, because of that, it has to be a space that people want to come back to. And I always found it kind of funny during the pandemic that, people really resisted going back to the office. And, initially, they didn't want to go anywhere, right? And initially, people were kind of like, I don't know, I don't want to be around you because, you don't know if you're going to get sick or what have you. Okay, that happened for a little bit. But then, if you remember when the restaurants opened up again, they were all packed, right? Everybody wanted to go to a restaurant. And it wasn't because they didn't have food at home. It was because they wanted to be in that environment. It was a destination that people wanted to go to, just to be around other people because they enjoyed the environment, they enjoyed the ambiance. People still didn't want to go back to the office. Well, why is that? Because they didn't feel value in that space and what that particular office had to offer them. It wasn't because they didn't want to be around people, because those same people were at the restaurants, they were at the breweries, they were at all the other parks and everything else that everybody was together at. So it was no longer a proximity pandemic kind of debacle. It was that office maybe wasn't a desirable place to get together and collaborate, and it wasn't sort of like, I would say, worth the commute. So here's a few things that, some organizations are doing, and this is going to continue to be a moving target as time goes on, but kind of some of the key points is, yes, there is a reduction in real estate in many, many cases, because like I said, you just don't need as much real estate if people aren't in the office every day. But you are having differences in the way the real estate is configured. You're going to have more modern real estate, and that is an opportunity for us here as we can help our customers build more collaborative, more impactful meeting spaces. You also might see companies going, well, we need to have some kind of presence here, but do we need a whole office to ourselves? Or maybe it makes sense for us to do something with some kind of co-working space or somewhere else like mixed use, shared space. So there's different types of creative thinking going on outside of just, well, we have people in Denver, we better set up an office in Denver. Like, that no longer should be the mode of thinking for somebody who's really looking ahead into the future. So, like I said, we're not returning. We're not going back. We're definitely not going back to the offices of 2019. And like this quote says, if you're going to ask somebody to come into an office, there better be a reason that they're coming there. And whether that's coming there one day a week or one day a month or one day a quarter, there needs to be a valuable reason for why they're making a commute to do something, that they, don't need to have cars on the road. They don't need to be spending their time. They don't need to be giving somebody extra stress, because all that stuff just takes away from the ability for them to contribute to the actual, sort of task at hand. So kind of to more or less, go into how do we take this to the next level. This is a checklist that I've expanded on from last year, kind of taking a look at some things that have changed, as the last few months. But, first thing is cloud, okay? So the cloud is really key to enabling all kinds of flexible, productive work, and honestly, in anything, okay? So, we all kind of think cloud, we think video meetings, right? We think Zoom and Teams and those meetings that are in the cloud. That's definitely one key piece of cloud, but then there's also documents. And we do not need to live in a world anymore where I have documents saved on my laptop and I'm emailing you a PowerPoint presentation and then you're doing something with it, and then do I have the latest copy? Like, I don't know, like what kind of version control is on this stuff? Like, if it just lives in the cloud and we're just working on it in the cloud, then we just simplify this immensely because, we're always working off of the same document, and, you hear that term like that what is it, that meeting that could have been an email? Like, maybe it didn't need to be an email or a meeting, and you could just work right in the document, right? The document itself is a tool for this asynchronous collaboration that could happen. I mean, there's certainly a lot of things that can just be done by editing, making comments, maybe somebody who's, and halfway around the world sees it, they can do that. Like, you don't need to have a meeting to do all that necessarily. Sometimes you do. Sometimes if it gets to be like, well, let's talk through this, yeah, then you need a meeting, right? Then you go back to the cloud meeting. But documents in the cloud are like just super important, and I still see organizations struggling with that. I still see people that, well, did I get your latest copy of your spreadsheet? It's like, no. Put that somewhere. Obviously, you need to think about security and all kinds of other fun stuff when it comes to that, but there's really no reason for this, like trying to track down stuff that's on your laptop that somebody might have a different version. And so cloud is super, super key for enabling this type of work. Offices. Let's talk about offices. So, there are going to be people who go to an office every day, right? But that's going to be the minority. There's going to be people who never go to the office, ever. That also might be the minority. I mean, it might not be the minority. But assuming that you've got some distribution of people who are either in the office all the time, in the office none of the time, and then people that are sort of there on that hybrid schedule, or even the people who come none of the time, there's probably a time you're going to bring them together, right? There's probably a time you're going to do, like my organization, we do an off-site. We have people all over the place. We're going to go to one of the offices and we're going to do an off-site. Well, so we're not going to be in meetings like all day long with each other, right? We're going to need to have some private spaces, but we don't necessarily need to have an office dedicated to every single person that's there if they're not there all the time. But you do need to accommodate for some spaces for people to say, okay, we had a meeting in the morning and a meeting in the afternoon, but I've got a couple things I want to knock out for that hour between like 11 and 12 that I need to go somewhere that's a little quieter and kind of just do that thing. But it doesn't have to be like, I don't need that space all the time. I don't need to have an office with my name on it and pictures and everything else up on the wall just so I can be there, temporarily. So that's an area where definitely, you're going to have to accommodate for that. Can't have all collaborative spaces, can't have all private offices, but some offices that can be used in different ways for different people makes a whole lot of sense when you don't have people there all the time. And then, for those collaborative experiences, we really want to look at some of these high-impact spaces and look at how we have rooms that really elevate that collaborative experience. Because if we're just going to go build conference rooms with a monitor and just do Zoom or Teams meetings like with 2 people in there, they're not really, you're kind of making the argument there, like, how is this really better than if we just did this all in our own boxes from our own homes? So you do need to look at some of these spaces differently, and a lot of times you see a lot of that in flexible rooms, divisible spaces, more immersive type of environments. And this isn't like every organization doesn't need 10 of these, right? You need a few of them, but they're going to be really impactful spaces so that when you do bring people together, you can really get the most out of the time that they spend all together. Conference rooms, like this is an area where another thing is like, I don't even like the word room because maybe it's not a room. Maybe it's just a space like these people are sitting here on a couch with a display and they can just kind of have that, it's kind of that whole concept of like, a meeting doesn't have to be an hour, right? Some meetings need to be 10 minutes. They need to be 15 minutes. 15 minutes getting the right people together with the right agenda, talking about the right things is just huge. You can knock that out. You can get a lot done in that. But you need to have a space that's conducive for people to feel comfortable, having some of those ideas. So don't just think the 4 walls, it has to be a traditional conference room. Moving into the future, you're going to see spaces that are kind of like ad hoc meeting spaces. I mean, displays are not that expensive anymore, right? You can put them almost anywhere. And so having some of these spaces where people can sit down, throw something up on a screen, maybe be able to sit and talk together, knock it out. You don't have to build a whole conference room for that. So there's just different types of spaces that we can look at. Modern gear is another thing. So, this is an area that we've seen a lot of advancements in cameras, audio technology, and also within the software technology itself. But at the end of the day, you need compute to make a lot of this run, right? Because the more that they're able to do with these software platforms, the compute requirements go up. And I haven't even some of this is AI, but some of this is even pre-AI kind of stuff. But this is an example if you look at the screen of something that some of these software platforms have added called spatial audio. So what that does is it allows the audio to follow the speaker. So let's say this blonde woman with the yellow shirt is speaking. The audio could actually come more out of the speaker closer to her. And that provides a more natural environment for somebody within a room. Because that's, you hear a lot of this. Unfortunately, Zoom got the short end of the stick here when people use the word Zoom fatigue. It's not just them. It's all meeting platform fatigue people have. And a lot of that is our brain's just ability to concentrate and look at these faces talking at you, and the audio is not quite aligned with having a conversation with somebody in a room. So there's things like this that we can do to make that room experience even more enjoyable, more collaborative, and more just sort of natural, I guess is probably the best word for the participants in the room. We also have, artificial intelligence. I think this is something that we could talk through in much detail because it's coming up everywhere, right? It's everything from some of the intelligence that we're using within the room, but here's an example of some artificial intelligence that actually allows the active talker to be picked up by the speakers in the room and have a preset so that the video follows them, and that's what they see on the far end of the room. So for instance, if we're in this very, very large room, and this woman in the back of the room starts talking, somebody that's just looking at a video shot of that room on a video call isn't going to be able to tell who's asking the question or what their facial expressions look like or anything like that when they're asking the question. And heck, some of the people in the room might not even be able to tell what that person looks like. And especially in these large rooms, you usually have a screen in the room, right? So they're going to have something to look at. And then what the AI can do with some of this technology is identify, hey, based on where the audio is coming from, I know it's that lady who's talking, and the camera's going to go to her, and that's the image I'm going to show to the far end. And so a lot of that really helps both the in-person experience and the remote experience as well. But really, more so even the remote experience than anybody else. Finally, though, you can have all the greatest technology in the world, right? And there's so much out there, and I'm not going to spend any more time on all the stuff because it's continuing to evolve and it's continuing to come. But you really have to have people, and especially leaders, although my feeling is that everybody in an organization can and should be a leader in whatever way they can. But we really have to have leaders and especially managers trained to support a hybrid workforce. They have to have the mindset of doing things in a different way. They have to use the tools and technologies that they have. I mean, how many businesses and organizations out there have technologies and features built into technologies that they don't use at all? I mean, I know, it exists in every organization, and you hear people they have video conferencing and they don't turn their cameras on. It's why? And that's just one example, but there's all kinds of examples of technologies that aren't being used, and it takes somebody to develop that culture and you don't just tell people you got to turn all your cameras on. You really have to show people the value of how these tools and technologies really allow them to deliver better work. And really, it's just critical for these managers especially to have the mindset that we do live in a new world, and we do need to be able to be inclusive and understand people. So maybe instead of the old days where managers used to kind of walk around the office and check up on everybody and see what they're doing and have I have an open door policy. Okay, great. But if I'm 200 miles away, I can't tell that your door is open. But if you can leave that green light on your Teams chat on, then I know it's a safe space for me to contact you, and I can feel like I can reach out to you as my manager. And so there's different ways we can use this technology to be available and to work with other people. And certainly there are a lot of differences in generations in terms of how people use that. We were just having this conversation last night around, like, in my generation, if somebody wanted to talk to you, they just call you. But in younger generations, I've had colleagues say, like, I get offended when somebody calls me if they don't ping me on Teams first. And it's like, okay, well, you want to understand that because, in my opinion, it's like, look, if you call me and I can't take the call, I'm just not going to answer it. Like that, you don't have to ask to call me. That's just how it was done, 20 years ago. And that's just my mindset is like, I'll take it if I can, but if I can't, no big deal. I'm not going to be offended if you call me. But you have to recognize, like, some people did not grow up in that world. Some people grew up in the world of always being able to text somebody first to say, hey, are you free? And just recognizing some of those differences. We have 4 generations in the workforce today, and that's a lot of, in very different times that we all grew up in, which is really, really something that this world has never seen before. So, and then there's lots of different ways you can learn, right? So there's all kinds of different training courses and things on LinkedIn, and just really kind of also getting back to some of the key, sort of human concepts around being empathetic and understanding and seeing things through a different lens, and really more importantly, just developing a mindset to embrace change, look forward, and use what you have as best as you can, and see what's coming and see how that can actually help your ability to do work differently. Because yes, everything has a learning curve, right? Everything took time to learn, but it's like an investment you make in the learning curve, and then over time you're far, far more productive. And I was kind of equate that to, like, if you're going to invest your money, yeah, in the short term you have less money, but in the long term you have more money. But you had to deal with that, a little bit of that short-term pain of having less money. Like when somebody told me when I was 25 years old, you better start putting money in your 401k, and I'm like, really? I'm 25 years old. And they're like, yeah, but you'll thank me later. And honestly, I'm really, really grateful that I had a friend who told me to do that when I was 25 years old today, right? But when I was 25, I was like, but that's like a few $100s I could use for whatever, But you have to make those investments. You have to look forward. You have to take that and go, okay, what can I invest in today that's going to pay off, big in the future? And like I said, it all comes back to there's not a one-size-fits-all. Everybody is going to have different needs. There certainly is a need for 100% fully in person. There's a need somewhere for 0% in person. And it's really looking at where we are, what we have, what's your role, how can you best contribute, and being flexible to allow that to change over time, because it might, as new things come about. I'm looking for the day where I don't have to go to the doctor to get some basic tests done, because maybe I'll have some technology on my iPhone that can provide that data to the doctor and go, oh yeah, she needs a prescription, or she's good, or she needs to come in for that. Like there's things that are going to continue to evolve that are going to make my needing, who wants to go drive across town to the doctor when they're sick? Like, there's just things like that that are continuing to change over time that will enable some of these things to happen more effectively and more efficiently. So that's kind of what I had today. Like I said, I wasn't going to take the whole hour. Does anybody have any questions on anything? Yeah.
Do you think that catering too much one way or the other is ultimately going to cause bigger problems in the future with the workforce? It appears that the generational problem, where we have tons of people that are in a certain age bracket that are choosing to work from home. They don't want to get up and come to work because they can stay in their pajamas and do the same work. And, the reason I think the majority of, people my age have succeeded is because of the work ethic that they have. And do you think by just continuously catering to a certain generation that doesn't want to do something is going to make it worse in the future?
I don't like the idea of like catering to a generation that doesn't want to do so. And actually, some of the data I've seen out there actually says that the younger generation wants to come to the office more, versus like the older generation. I'm like, you've already done that and you've already met. So there's a tremendous value in meeting people for the first time, right? But like once you've done that, it's easier to maintain the relationship. you know, and once you've had some of that, it's easier to maintain it over time. Like, I don't need to see you every day to continue to work with you, because now I know you, and like I can, but I think that, again, it comes back to what's their role and where can they be most effective, and it is bringing people together for some things sometimes. And yeah, I mean, you know, I'm one of these people that, although I've been a remote employee forever, like I still wake up with the mindset of like, I'm not going to work in my pajamas, because like it puts me in the wrong frame of mind, right? Like, yeah, you know, yes, I will admit I have, you know, come back from my run and join a conference call by putting a scarf on and looking good for video. Like, it happens from time to time, because, you know, it's just life, right? But I think part of that is you still need to be ready to work. You still need to be on when you're in front of your computer, and that's a mindset shift more than a having to come in sort of shift. So yeah,
because what I'm running into, and it's mostly the 27 to 40-year-old.
That's the millennial generation,
that are,
effectively.
Life is important, and they spend a lot of time. They'll take conference calls from the grocery store, and their mindset is, it doesn't matter when I work as long as I make up my work. But then what happens is they don't always make up their work, and then they get behind, and then they start complaining that they're behind and they can't get their work done. But if you look at the reasons of that, they're always the ones that's on the conference calls with no cameras on. They're always not participating. They're not, you know, like.
And I think that's where, as leaders, we can help those people, not just tell them what to do, right? Because that's not what they want. They do not want us telling them what to do. They need to see the value in why being face-to-face with you in a place where I can sit down and actually see you and concentrate. I mean, there's calls I don't like to take calls when I'm driving anyway. We're not good drivers in Colorado. Like, we don't need to add to the problem here. But, you know, I know that my attention is not fully there when I'm in the car. And if you're at the grocery store or going through the car wash, and I say some of these things because I have been on calls with people who have done that. I'm like, you still need to be focused. That's the key. It's not so much where you are, it's that you're focused on the job at hand and what you're doing. And that is, I think, where we maybe haven't done as good of a job in showing people the value of what they're doing and why they're doing and how it affects other people and how they're working, you know, because it affects you. When you're having a call with somebody who's like halfway there because they're at the grocery store or whatever, like, you didn't really have a call with them. You like sort of did, but they're not really paying attention because they're looking for the peanut butter and they're not really seeing, like, you know, they're kind of halfway. So that's where we really need to. There's no tools or technologies that's going to change that. That's effectively mindset and training and focus and you know, maybe there's something about that organization that they don't feel connected to. Maybe there's some reason where they don't feel like they need to give a full attention because they feel somehow that they're doing enough. Like, I think that kind of goes back to some of that quiet quitting stuff. It's like, you know, do they really feel like they're invested in this, or do they want to give their best? And you know, I think everybody understands things come up, but like, there's a difference between things coming up and then things that are like constant. You know, like I know the people who, like, as I said, I've had calls with those people who are out, you know, at the grocery store or in the drive-through, or like yeah. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have any psychological studies supporting or backing the idea that people are more productive than they are flexible? So, like, for example, why do we need this? To focus, we need to change the place, or we need some time for break to prepare for work, so like 20 minutes. I heard those studies, but do you have that?
I don't have any with me. I have seen a lot of them. You know, as a remote worker myself, I would consider myself an extrovert, like as a general rule. You know, so I'm not somebody who, and I only say that because I'm not somebody who just doesn't want to be around people ever. Like, you know, some people that are introverts, like, really are like, I'm good. I'm just going to stay in my cave and do whatever I want to do. That's actually not me. Like, I actually am a pretty extroverted person, but I did find that when I started working remotely, and even sometimes now, I needed a change of scenery. And I think now I live in a house. Maybe before I lived in a condo, so I didn't have as many options within my house. But let's say I used to like walk across the street and work at the coffee shop, or sometimes now I'll just go, okay, I'm going to just move to the kitchen, and I think that psychologically helps me. You know, it depends on the kind of work I'm going to do. Now, if I'm going to do the kind of work where I need 3 monitors, I'm going to be in my office. But if I'm going to do the kind of work where, you know, I'm like, you know, maybe I'm a participant in a meeting with 300 people and it's a webinar, so none of our cameras are on, then maybe I go somewhere more comfortable where I can just pay attention, because nobody's looking at me at that point, right? Because our cameras aren't on, it's on webinar mode, and it's just somebody giving a town hall presentation. And so I think it is healthy to not be stuck. The other thing, you know, you realize is, like, it's easy when you work from home. If you have one of these, like, fitness trackers on your watch, oh my God, it's like, it's noon and I have 150 steps. Like, that never happens in an office, because it would take 150 steps to go to the bathroom, like out here, right? So people do have a tendency to get a little too stuck in their offices, like in their little spaces. And so even if you don't have the physical space within your own living quarters or what have you, it is, in my opinion, healthy to get out and walk around and, you know, maybe go somewhere. You know, you have to learn how to do this right. You can't just say, okay, I used to go to the office, now I'm just going to go sit in my office at home for 8 hours a day. And that drives a lot of people really crazy. And I think that is another reason why some of the younger people do want to go to an office, because maybe they, you know, when I was 25 years old, like, I lived in a small apartment. Like, I wouldn't have been very happy working from home. I didn't really know how to navigate the corporate world. But actually, it was interesting. When I was young, I had, before I was in AV, and I was in my 20s, I actually had a remote manager. And I lived in California, and he lived in Texas, and he lived in like an hour outside of Dallas on a ranch with like 15 horses. I mean, the guy was not moving to the Bay Area, right? Like, there was just no world. He would have been like the guy that said, no, I'm not doing this job if I have to move to the Bay Area. So they said, okay, you can work from Texas. And we didn't have video conferencing. I mean, not really back then. Like, that was one of those days where, like, if you want to have a video call, you had to schedule it like a week in advance and get in a room, and everybody kind of looked at each other funny because they weren't used to seeing themselves on TV kind of thing. So we just talked on the phone all the time. But I say that because even back then, when there were no good technologies really besides this, and even these weren't that good back then, you know, we were actually able to do really good work together. And he did come to, like, 'cause I worked in the office, he would come to the office probably, you know, once a month. We'd sync up, you know, so we had that relationship development happening. We had that, like, you know, we knew, it's hard when you don't know somebody's a real person. So, like, you know, you see people differently when you know them. And so, I say that because we were able to make that work, you know, but we had a different mindset of, you know, how it was going to work and how we were going to work together. And he was very respectful of the fact that, like, I was 2 hours behind, and, you know, he wasn't going to expect me to work on his schedule, and I wasn't going to call him at 10 o'clock at night, you know, or 8 o'clock at night or whatever. Like, there was just things like that. So it can actually work. It's been working. It's been working for a long time. And so really, we have more tools and technologies than we ever did to make it work, but we have to want to make it work, and we have to want to define, like, what are the outcomes here we're trying to do, and then, you know, work through the processes that are going to make that happen. Anybody else? Well, I appreciate you all coming. Thank you for having me here, and enjoy the rest of the show.